Tonight is Victorians. Who doesn't love a Victorian? And we have some beauties here in New Bedford, and we're going to see some of the nicest ones in the neighborhood. It's a pretty short walk, actually, to see most of the houses we're seeing tonight. And there's going to be, even on the tour that we're taking tonight, there's going to be some houses I'm going to walk by that you're going to say, oh, why didn't he talk about that one? If you have a question about that, either ask me when we stop or see me when we're walking from place to place, because I know about all the houses that we're going to even walk by and not talk about tonight. But the ones we are going to see are some of the beauties in the city. Most of them are single family still. Some of them are multi-families, but most of them are still single family homes. Some of them have been turned into partial businesses and so forth. But nonetheless, I've been in all of the houses on the tour tonight. And the interiors are still in very good condition. And many of the original features are still there. If you have an opportunity to go to any of our Christmas tours, most of the houses on tonight's tour have been on our holiday house tour in the past. So when we do that tour again, check it out, because the interiors of the old Victorians are pretty special. This is the first house on our tour tonight. It's the Ivory Bartlett Jr. house, built in the 1850s. It's in the Italianate or in Renaissance Revival style. The decorative elements, such as the half-round windows, the big brackets underneath the eaves. Those are some of the hallmarks of the Italianate style. It's kind of a big square box. Looks like a house that might have been built in during the Renaissance, a big giant manor house. Look at the great pendants and the work in the entryway. This is a great building. It's actually a three-family now, but the bottom, this quarter of the house, the first floor here, and then and to the back is actually the homeowners, the landlord's property, and he's done a beautiful job of fixing this place up. It looks beautiful inside. It's on the house tour occasionally, and it's just a beautiful building inside. I haven't been in the rest of the house, but it's a beautiful building there. Now, it also has a spectacular tower in the back. If you've come up Spring Street, you can see this. You can see the top of it here. It's really a spectacular tower. Apparently, it was built when the house went up. Towers like this are fairly typical in large Italianate Victorian buildings, but this one's kind of oddly placed in the back, but still a beautiful little addition to this particular property. Color scheme is really well done. I'm not going to talk about all the color schemes, because some of the color schemes don't belong on the houses they're on, but this one here is very well done. It's a very nice house all around. Now, Ivory Bartlett, who lived in this house in the 1850s, he was a whaling merchant, and he was also the agent for a very historic event that happened called the Stone Fleet. The Stone Fleet was organized by the U.S. Navy at the beginning of the American Civil War to buy whale ships and other derelict vessels, sail them down to Charleston, South Carolina, and blockade the port. And Ivory Bartlett, who actually sold some of his own ships, he was kind of double dipped on this deal, because he was the agent for the government, and he also sold some of his ships that he didn't want anymore anyway. He was the agent for that particular endeavor. Now, the blockade was a total failure. The ships were sunk. They were filled with stone and sand and other heavy stuff, sunk in the harbor, but the current in the harbor was so strong it just washed them away, so it was a complete failure. But anyway, the Stone Fleet is kind of one of those footnotes in history for New Bedford during the American Civil War, and Ivory Bartlett had a very big role in that, because he was the one who organized the Stone Fleet. This is called the Marsha Clark House, built in the late 1880s. It's in the Queen Anne style. It's got a lot of interesting details on the outside of this house. And it has its original slate roof. One thing I'm going to try to point out when I remember to do so, a lot of these houses have their original slate roofs. These roofs are well over 100 years old, 120, 30, 40 years old, and this is one of them. I've been in this house many times. One of my friends, actually president of the Preservation Society at the time, lived in this house, so I've been in this house a lot. It's very odd interior. Lots of small rooms. Lots of small rooms. There's plenty of rooms. 3 floors of rooms in this house. And right here, though, is the dining room. And this stained glass window is really spectacular window here. I think that we had an idea who designed this window. It's not anybody like Tiffany or anything like that, but it was a pretty famous stained glass maker at the time. Beautiful window. The other thing about this house that I love to see when I went to visit it is a library or a treasure trove of a particular tile maker's tile. His name was John Low, L-O-W. He made tile for fireplace surround. Beautiful tile. It's all over in almost every one of these houses that we'll see that was built after 1880 has John Low tile in it. It's a heavily glazed tile. It's mostly like deep greens, aesthetic greens, reds, highly glazed yellows, and they also had John Low had a very famous artist who did the faces and animal figures in blue. Beautiful tiles, and this house is loaded with it right here. All right, this is one of the most exuberant of all of the Victorians in New Bedford. Most of the housing, no matter what the era in New Bedford, it's a little restrained actually. It's not as exuberant or inventive or creative as some of the other cities, but this is an exception to that. Originally, it was owned by and built by a man named Gilbert Russel, one of the founding family, the founding family of what is now New Bedford. And the plaque says Gilbert Russel, 1805, but that's not what we should have not named that house the Gilbert Russel house. Because in the 1860s, a Dr. Abbe, A-B-B-E, Dr. Abbe, he purchased the property and completely rebuilt the house into this fanciful Victorian facade building. Really quite spectacular. It's in the French Second Empire style. Anytime you see a mansard roof, like on this particular slanted roof on the 3rd level, it's called a mansard roof. It was developed by a man named Mansard, sort of that style by a man named Mansard in France. And with this style of house, mansion was popular in the 1860s when this house was redesigned. But he has all this fanciful design in the front, all this Middle Eastern or Near Eastern archways, and looks like almost a arabesque house to some degree. Very, very unusual. This upsweep in the front here, just unbelievable. You know, there's ornamentation everywhere in this property. There's an octagonal cupola on the top. I mean, really, he went all out to redesign this house. And for years and years, actually, I said I've been in all the houses. I have not been in this house. I have not been in this house. For years and years, it was a convent, and it was painted blue. It didn't change much in all those years. And then, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, the convent sold it to a private party, and they restored the house and did a nice job, except they painted it pink. Pink is not a Victorian color. I know it's used a lot in Victorian houses now because, you know, it's sort of fanciful and, you know, and romantic, I guess. But pink was not a color that was used during the Victorian times. So they painted it pink, though. And, you know, they did a nice, well, it needs a new paint job, clearly. But all the detailing they did, the multicolors, the picking out of the details, they did a nice job in concept of painting the house, because that's what all these little details are meant to be. You can't just all paint them white, you'd never see them. You know, and they did a nice job of picking it out. The problem was they used pink as the ground. If they used anything else, it would have been a lot more attractive. And they sold the house, though, to the Women's Center, and they've occupied the house, I would say, for the last 10 years or so. So anyway, Dr. Abbe built this house. He owned the lot, all the land behind the house, too, at one time. If you went on the tour the first tour, I guess it was the first tour, his son was the one who developed the Clinton Place property that we went to on the very first tour this year in May. Any questions about this property? Before I leave here, actually, I do want to point out, because we're going to see a lot of it in the next few buildings, all the wrought iron fencing that's around most Victorians. That if it's not there now, in a house that was built from the 1850s to through the 1880s, there used to be one at one time. There'd be an iron fence around the house. And as you can see, a lot of the fencing still exists. On the house across the street, the Gothic there, this house here, and you'll see remnants of when you can tell it used to have a fence because it'll have a big giant curb in front of the house, and sometimes you can still see where the fence used to be stuck into the granite. That was a key. When you look at the old pictures of County Street, you'll see a wrought iron fence in almost every house. This house really is one of the beauties in New Bedford. It's been converted to a sort of an office building. This is the house that is listed for sale right now for $1 million. Now, that seems I don't live in New Bedford anymore, but I lived in New Bedford since 1994, and there's a ceiling on pricing in New Bedford, and it's a lot lower than that. But anyway, it's a beautiful house, no doubt about it. We posted the listing of this house on our website. There's lots of pictures of the interior of the house. This is magnificent. It really is magnificent. 1880. Now, in the older homes before 1880, the interiors are usually ornamented in walnut and mahogany. In 1880, it changes to oak. And that's mostly, I mean, there's still some houses that might have used, the other woods, but most of the interior decorative wood is oak. And that's the case in this house here. Beautiful building, great spaces. It's in the early Queen Anne style, very, very stylish. You can see the two levels of material. There's brick on one level, and then we have shaped shingles on the next. It's just a beautiful building. Then some decorative brick, or maybe it's terracotta here. It's just a great building. Joseph Beauvais, who built this house, was a banker, and he was involved in so many commercial ventures. It's hard to believe that he had the time to serve on so many boards. He was on boards across the Bristol County and Taunton and Fall River and here. Mostly in banking, but also in railroads and so forth. He was a very, very busy guy, that's for sure. And he built this great house here. And it's really quite different from almost anything else that's in New Bedford. He probably hired an architect that was from out of town, maybe even someone who was English trained, because this house is very much like an English Victorian in its style and in its detailing, and even on the inside. There is some low tile in this particular house, the same tile I talked about on the house on the corner next to the Roosevelt. But there's also lots of Minton tile. That's a very famous tile maker in England. So there's a mix of things. Just the detailing in this house is really quite spectacular. It's been an office building for a long time, and there's a lot of white paint on the inside, but nonetheless, a lot of the detailing has the staircases and all the other details, the wood trim and so forth is intact. Beautiful building on the inside. I encourage you to look at the pictures because it's just very interesting to see what it looks like. This house has been on our holiday house tour in quite a while ago, and when it was extremely popular because it's really pretty spectacular. They put a brand new in the far corner of the other side of this house. They put a brand new bathroom, in that floor, and they used this red marble. It was stunning, really. They must have spent a fortune on this bathroom. It's on the other side of the house in the corner, and so they've spent, they've really kept the property up beautifully. And I believe they also have yes, they do, the original slate roof. This is the stable for the property. Now, it's hard to see, but the back of this is just as big as the front of this stable. It's a big building, carriage house, as well as horse stable. So this isn't just a place for the carriages, but it also held the horses as well. A big building in the back. I didn't realize how big it was until they showed an aerial view of it on this list, the real estate listing. It's a huge building, beautiful condition. Again, nicely detailed. Just a great building. Thomas Knowles' house. about the same time as this house, actually. In concept, it's a Gothic, sort of a modern Gothic look to this house. In reality, it's very, very unusual. There's no house really built in Victorian era that looks like this. It's very unusual. The design of this house, almost like, to me, is like whoever designed this house, like the Frank Gehry, who's kind of a very modernist architect today. You know, he did put this house together because it's very different. There's nothing like this really, as far as design goes. Beautiful stained glass again. You can see here. This has been a dentist's office for a long time. It is my dentist, actually. Yeah, and he has his waiting room is a spectacular oak-paneled, floor-to-ceiling waiting room. It's absolutely spectacular. It's a little bit, you know, it probably needs to be refinished and stuff. But when you walk in, you say, wow, you know what I mean? This is just and it's all oak because you can see the quarter-sawn boards and so forth in there. No question, it's oak. And even in the area where you go to get your teeth done and stuff, they didn't take the fireplaces out. You know, that house can be converted back to a family home again. Actually, he lived, when it was Jim Schweidenbach, I don't know if you know Jim Schweidenbach, he lived in the back, he lived in the rest of the house, which I haven't been in actually. But again, what you can see is really quite spectacular. Beautiful house in the Gothic style. Thomas Knowles, I should talk about him briefly. Thomas Knowles was a whaling merchant. He's a classic New Bedford venture capitalist. He was a whaling merchant during the heyday of whaling, and as whaling petered out, he transferred all his assets, which were probably considerable because he was a big deal in the textile industry. He started investing all his money he had made in whaling into the textile industry in the late 1870s and 1880s, and that was sort of typical. You know, I've mentioned that on other tours. People have come on my tours. I've mentioned that a lot about how all the whaling capital was transferred into the textile industry in the 1870s and 80s, and Thomas Knowles, who had this house built in the 1880s, was one of those guys. These two houses, this one and this one, that one was mine, by the way, for many years. So don't say anything bad about that one. But these two houses were built in 1875 on spec, of all things. They did not have buyers when they built these houses. This is the feature house right here. Now, you know, I know that the same guy designed probably both houses. I mean, they're built at the same time. The same builder built houses. That's, you know, that's all that history was known. But the architect wasn't known. And everybody wants to know, if possible, who built their, you know, who designed their house, you know. I was doing a project on this particular style of house, which is either modern Gothic. It's often referred to as stick style as well. I was doing a project on that. Going through a magazine called the American Architect and Building News, which was sort of a trade journal for architects at the time. And lo and behold, I see a building that says House on Bush, which is what this was called, and Orchard Street. And I look at it and I say, my goodness, this is this lot. This is the lot that this giant house was going to be on. And the architect was obviously listed. His name was John M. Allen. Well, to make a long story short, this gigantic house that he had built was supposed to occupy this whole space from where that stockade fence is all the way to Orchard Street. One gigantic house. 1875. And he even said it. He gave it the specs, where it was going to be, and so forth. Well, 1875 was actually in the midst of an economic depression in the country at the time. So I think the developer or the architect probably presented the thing, you know, the plan was to build one big house on this one site. And they said, you know, that house isn't going to sell right now. So let's build two houses instead of one. So they cut the original giant house down to this. Now this is an enormous house. This is one of the great Victorians in New Bedford. 6,000 square feet of space in this house. The interior on this house is absolutely spectacular, like it's a museum quality interior. A giant double parlor on this side, beautiful two rooms on this side. Dining room is to die for with the woodwork and so forth. The double parlor on this side actually has been redone into a more colonial revival style. But again, top of the line cherry, all of the most exotic woods, and the greatest care was taken to build this house. Now when we walk by the driveway here, you'll see the giant carriage house in the back, another big giant carriage house. Been in that as well. There was places for horses as well as carriages. It's a big building, a big giant hayloft as well on top. A classic stable attached to this particular house, still stands. And so that's what I think they did. Because when you look at I think we'd be able to post a picture, a copy of that. It's not a great copy that I have, but a copy of that image of the original house that was in that magazine in 1875. And when you strip off all the towers and other stuff, you see this house right in the middle of it all. Can you imagine this house with like double the space that we have right now? And that's what it was. There was all kinds of ornament on this side, a big giant ornament on this side, like a big tower and so forth. It was going to occupy this whole area. But anyway, this is a museum quality house. Probably one of the nicest interiors, in New Bedford. These are the types of colors on this house that were typical of Victorian colors, tertiary colors. We did a lot of research to come up with these colors. We did it to make sure we weren't doing what somebody else was doing. The big house, really, the blue would probably not be an authentic color for that house. There's a giant medallion in the foyer of that house of encaustic tiles, and all the colors you would need to paint that house are in that medallion. But anyway, these are the types of colors, tertiary colors. That's what was popular during this area of Victorian house design. Terracottas and greens and the straws, and even brown and yellow was used a lot in these houses. You wouldn't think it would be a great combination, and it isn't today, but it was pretty common in those days to paint the houses that color. When we were on the tour, we were always referred to as the wallpaper house, because we had wallpaper everywhere on the ceiling, and so it sounds bizarre, but it looked quite spectacular actually. This is one of New Bedford's most famous and admirable residences, called the William J. Rotch Cottage, built in 1846. This is really a hallmark of the Gothic revival style in residential architecture. The architect was a guy named Alexander Jackson Davis. He was one of the most important men designing in this style during the 1830s and 40s. William J. Rotch apparently bumped into some of his houses in the Hudson River Valley, where a lot of his houses are. If anybody's familiar with Lyndhurst in Tarrytown, pretty famous Gothic style, it's another one of his houses, Jackson Davis's houses. Alexander Jackson Davis also designed the Unitarian Church in town. Anyway, it's a spectacular house in the Gothic revival style. It's huge arches and pointed arches, just spectacular design in the gable, which is typical of this. Just detail everywhere, very balanced as well. A lot of typical Gothic motifs in this house. This is a historical landmark, a national historic landmark, the highest honor that a property can get from the government is landmark status. You can see the plaque right here, landmark status. I think only RJD and the Siemens Bethel, I think, are maybe the other two in New Bedford that have landmark status. So it's an important building. This building appears in almost every textbook on 19th century American architecture as the typical and one of the highest style designs of the Gothic revival. William J. Rotch was the great-grandson of the founder of the whaling industry in New Bedford. He was a very wealthy man. He ended up moving from this house to the Wamsutta Club, or the James Arnold Mansion, where we started the tour, when his uncle, James Arnold, willed him the house, and he redesigned that. He had a big family, like 6 or 8 kids. This house, hard to believe, couldn't fit a family that size, so we moved to the Arnold estate and redesigned it into a big Victorian at the time. Anyway, it's a beautiful house. was painted just yellow for a long period of time. It was the same color yellow paint that had been on the presentation drawing, which the Bullards had at the time. Presentation drawing is usually a painting or watercolor of the house by the architect given to the owner of the house when it's built as sort of a gift almost, you know. And they had that built. They had that building. They had that picture. So, and it was always painted the same. They changed it to green a few years ago. Still a beautiful building. The whole property is really lovely still. They still kept a lot of the gardens going. They have a pretty large, sizable, for New Bedford, it's not a large lot generally, but for New Bedford on the south side of the property. So it's nice. It's still a beautiful property here. Really one of the houses that New Bedford can really be most proud of in the city. This is the last house on the tour. One of the really great Victorians here in New Bedford. It's in an early Queen Anne style, actually. One of the nice things about this, you have the 3 levels. Queen Anne is often highlighted by 3 levels of siding. And this one has it. You have the clapboards on the first level. You can see that the terracotta color. Then you have the shingles on the next level, and then you have sort of in the tower there. You have a different siding. That was kind of typical. Also, these great wraparound porches. Now, this porch wraps around the back or the side of the house as well, and you can see all the turnings. You can't see them very well, but all the turn posts and stuff, all the fretwork above. Beautiful job on this particular property. This has a unique feature of this house is this porte cochere, as they call it, this canopy over the front entrance. Really unusual feature for New Bedford, not so much for other places, but for New Bedford it's kind of a unique feature. This house was designed by an architect by the name of an architectural firm by the name of Peabody and Stearns. They were very well-known architects in the country. The last quarter of the 19th century did some very famous buildings. But this one here is a beauty. The person who lived in this house was named Charles Clifford. His father was named John Clifford. He was the only man from New Bedford to be governor of the state of Massachusetts. His son Charles owned this house. He was a very, very influential lawyer. The law firm of Clifford and his partners, Crapo and Prescott, were very, very big deals in New Bedford during their time. They were involved in all sorts of businesses, and John Clifford really was the sort of the legal mind. I mean, Charles Clifford was sort of the legal mind of the group. So that, that concludes our tour tonight. If thank you very much. Our next tour is going to be the era of houses just after the Victorian. We're going to be doing houses in Arnold Place, and so similar quality, just a different era. So thanks for coming tonight. Hope to see you again soon. The architects didn't want anything, there was no space that they didn't want to have ornamented, That was the idea. No space unornamented. That's what when we see the iron cresting when we go up on Madison Street, they didn't want anything to look plain. Everything had to be ornamented.